So I'd like to introduce Mark Penn, who's also got a great history in political media marketing. I mean, he's literally the father of modern day presidential polling. He, of course, owns the Harris poll as part of his portfolio at Stagwell. In the short span of less than a decade, he's transformed Stagwell into one of the leading, I would argue, the challenger brand on Madison Avenue. It owns the most diversified portfolio of agencies, including the most concentrated ones in this space. Agencies like Targeted Victory, as well as some great commercial, creative, and media agencies like Assembly and 72 and Sunny and Crispin and others. And today he's going to give you a great breakdown on what marketers could learn from political campaigns, but also conversely, what political candidates can learn from marketing campaigns. Thank you. Mark?
All right, thank you, Joe. Look, I've been blessed to do a range of politics and commercial work, so that when I would try new techniques and things, and I'd go to the president, and the president would say, "Why are we doing it this way?" I'd say, "Well, because our largest corporations do it this way." And then when I was working for AT&T, and they'd say, "Why would we do it this way?" I'd say, "Because the president is doing it in his campaign." So it was always about the kind of cross-pollination of the two and learning from each. So I'm just going to give you kind of a little overview of, coming now a little bit more from the corporate these days, my what I call campaign KPIs, right? Because always what they do. And so I always judge a campaign by are there 5 key elements of a campaign that you can specify? If you actually can name all 5 of these things with some specificity, you have a campaign. And if you can't, you might want to fill the hole, right? Because if you have all 5, you're not definitely going to win, but you got a higher probability of winning. So what are those 5 things? Well, a slogan that somebody can remember and mean something, number 1. Number 2, a biography, right? Which is really not, it's not about what, Barack Obama did in kindergarten. It's really a statement of values, picking out those elements of the biography that represent values. 3rd, you've got to pick out some targeting, right? 4th, you've got to have some issues that you're running on. And if you're in the commercial world, it might be key features of your products instead. And then 5th, you got to have some edge, some competitive positioning. So those are, and I'll go through and kind of evaluate the last campaign on how it is, and then we'll get some questions. So the other thing to bear in mind, and I appreciate, Joe, you're calling Stagwell, which now has about 12,000 people in 40 countries, the Challenger Network, because the other thing in political marketing and in most commercial marketing, you're either the incumbent or you're the challenger, right? And if you're the incumbent, you got to run on your record, right? It's the same thing when people get a job, right? When you come in for a job, to get the job, you run on your resume. Here's what I'm going to do. When they come and evaluate you for a raise, a promotion, a continuation, you're an incumbent. You got to defend your record. You've got to define what the benefits and the things. Now, what was so interesting about this campaign is who was the incumbent and who was the challenger. Everybody was trying to kind of have it a little bit both ways, right? Trump was the challenger incumbent running sort of on his record. You would say that Harris was the incumbent running as a challenger, running away from the record, pretty much. I mean, it was kind of interesting in that, right? And then there were generally, it's interesting, in the commercial world, I find there are generally 2 kinds of challengers, okay, who come along. One is a challenger who comes along with a low-priced model, okay? So if you look at something like Dollar Shave against Gillette, Gillette was the incumbent, Dollar Shave came along. Did they come along with a better shave? No, they actually had a worse shave, right? What they came along with was a new business model. Just join the club. Don't worry, you don't have to pay all those big high prices, right? And we'll just send you a subscription. So that's a business model challenger, right? When you get a business model challenger, pretty much you can most of the time meet that by adopting their business model or crushing it. One of my first cases was really doing AT&T against MCI, which most people won't remember here, but we got rid of them in 5 weeks. And then the other challenger has like a genuine innovation. Like Tesla comes out with an electric car, okay? You can't just whip up an electric car a week later, right? Those challengers are really tough challengers. And so you got to kind of know which you're in. And then the other thing about the challenger incumbent model is that it flips around. You know, one day Microsoft is the challenger to IBM, and today IBM is the challenger to Microsoft. Walmart was the incumbent against Amazon. Today, Walmart is the challenger against Amazon. Now, maybe you think they're all incumbents at this point, but it's really important for one of them to adopt a kind of challenger mindset if they're going to go after the incumbent. So that's my kind of background. I think of things, are the 5 things there, and who are you, right? So look, when it comes to slogans, the Make America Great Again is probably the greatest slogan, at least in modern history, if not all time. But the interesting thing about the slogan is that it wasn't original to Trump, right? If you look at that button, Reagan had the same slogan in 1980. Bill Clinton, if I went through his materials, had the same slogan somewhere buried. It wasn't his primary slogan in 1992. So the other thing about slogans is you don't have to be totally original. You just have to have at least about a 20-year gap, okay? So a new way forward, that wasn't a bad slogan. I mean, I think there was some cut through on it. But the real problem I had with a new way forward was the whole incumbent challenger thing. Was it really credible? Okay. And the other thing about when you're designing a slogan, of course you want to move people a little bit over from where you are. But a new way forward, you know, had she done a better way forward, that might have had a lot more credibility, and it would have drawn from, you know, from Biden's old slogan about betterment. So I think that was a bridge too far, even though it wasn't a bad slogan. Now, I did this presentation actually before the election, so you'll see that it didn't really age badly. So, you know, some of my favorites, the stronger, you know, I loved Kennedy, a new leader for the 60s. See, the other thing about slogans is they tend to either be unifying, like stronger together, or you know, they have edge. Like leadership for the 60s, I really like. It's like, you don't need that Nixon guy. That Nixon guy's from the 50s, okay? So there's always hidden edge in a lot of the slogans. Although I like Ike, has no edge. It was quite memorable. And a chicken for every pot, okay, was perhaps Hoover's most classic slogan, which actually was like, they didn't have PACs in those days, but it actually came from the equivalent of a PAC. It wasn't Hoover's own slogan, but it really caught on. So again, I love sloganography. Al Gore had the people, not the powerful, and that's a divisive slogan. I did for Tony Blair, forward, not back, a dividing slogan as well. So biography, I think biographies here were pretty straightforward, right? The billionaire who cares about the working class, a tireless fighter against the status quo. I think that was pretty much where they came down. And of course, there was never an interview in which Harris didn't say, I was raised in a middle-class family, right? And that was kind of her primary, and then she prosecuted drug dealers and human traffickers. So they each had their positions. Their bios couldn't frankly be more different, right? And she was trying to emphasize I'm from a middle-class family, and she was saying, look, he's from a billionaire class, right? He was always rich. Now, the thing about that is that America, you know, when you go through the Kennedys, the Roosevelts, actually George Washington, when I went back to do the research, was one of the richest people in America. So America and presidents, they're not against wealthy presidents, okay? In fact, they have a little bias that maybe they're not corrupt if they're wealthy, but there's been a history of that. The king of bio was, look, Barack Obama and Bill Clinton were both kings of bio. They used it incredibly effectively. I'll just spend a minute on this incredible spot from Bill Clinton.
I was born in a little town called Hope, Arkansas, 3 months after my father died. I remember that old two-story house where I lived with my grandparents. They had very limited incomes. It was in 1963 that I went to Washington and met President Kennedy at the Boys Nation program. And I remember just thinking what an incredible country this was, that somebody like me, had no money or anything, would be given the opportunity to meet the president. That's when I decided I could really do public service because I cared so much about people. I worked my way through law school with part-time jobs, anything I could find. And after I graduated, I really didn't care about making a lot of money. I just wanted to go home and see if I could make a difference. We've worked hard in education and healthcare and to create jobs, and we've made real progress. Now it's exhilarating to me to think that as president, I could help to change all our people's lives for the better and bring hope back to the American dream.
Yeah, I mean, I love that as a bio. I mean, it's an incredible statement of his values. I love how he takes this handshake from President Kennedy as a major kind of life event. I don't know whether it was or wasn't, but by the time you get to making the bio spot, but this really, I think America was taken very much, by his bio in 1992, just as I think Barack Obama was incredibly successful in that. But corporations have bios too, right? Remember those people working in garages and dorm rooms, right, in order to start their tech company. Walmart was two brothers, right, starting in a neighborhood store. McDonald's has, you can go see, I think they still have the original preserved McDonald's. And then everybody but me knows about this track and field coach with a waffle maker for Nike, right? But each one of those are kind of the value laden, how we started out with humble origins. And I don't find companies use their bio all that much these days. Every once in a while, they get to 100 anniversary or so forth. I think they probably could learn from political campaigns a little bit more in the use of bio and marketing. Of course, targeting. You probably have 5 presentations today, on the targeting. Part of a lot of what I did was to create a targeting model for the White House in base, swing 1, swing 2, and base voters that became, a real targeting model is not just a model for communications, it's a model for policy, it's a model for thinking. That's where also, when I was doing the work with President Clinton, mostly it was downscale, blue collar, non-college manufacturing men, who was the primary Democratic target. I changed that to women in the suburbs going to work for the first time. And that became known as soccer moms. And that was a revolution in Democratic targeting, right? And then all policy, Family and Medical Leave Act. Remember, it's when you policy and you're the president, when you target as the president, it's not just where the mailers go. Of course, where the mailers go, so to speak, is more and more online. You can see what happened to what was primarily 80% TV. There are 2 things in this chart. Number one, I used to joke when I did campaigns, I was always frustrated that they spent more money marketing a hamburger than they did on political campaigns. Now that we market hamburgers, of course, they spend more money on political campaigns. And you can see how that bar has gotten, bigger and bigger. You can also see how it's about 50, maybe 60% broadcast TV, down from 90. But you see that little green bar that in the last 2 cycles is connected TV, which obviously grew from 0 because it didn't really exist. And another word about targeting, I would say, is that most people don't realize that the Latino community is about 15% of America and about 13% of the voting population. When I was doing the work in '96, it was 2%. Asian community is really 5%. The 2 biggest demographic shifts in the last 30 years or so are really the growth of those 2 communities. Now, the interesting thing, despite all the talk of Joe Rogan, et cetera, about how these campaigns were run, only one group, when you break down the demographics, had a massive swing. That group was Latinos. They swung by over 20 points, both men and women, a tremendous swing. This election was actually won or lost in that swing when those voters seem to vote as working and middle-class voters and not subject to the more identity appeals from the Democrats. Certainly, there's not enough time to do that full analysis of the election, but when you get it, and of course, there's always a lot of fun. There are certain brands that that were Harris brands, the users of them, and certain brands like the F-150 for Ford, which would have been heavily Trump-laden. I always used to say that, back in the day when it was Clinton Gore against Dole signs, someone with a criminal background would know that the likelihood that there was a gun in the house with a Clinton sign was probably 0, and the likelihood with a Dole sign was probably about 80%. So there are huge demographic differences, out there. So I think the issues were pretty clear, right? Economy, immigration, energy, crime, ending the wars that never should have happened, versus abortion, opportunity, economy, housing, climate change. Look, I think I pointed out at the time the problem with the issues that Harris had is that they were not the major issues in the campaign, and that if you go back, there really were 2 major things in this campaign. Biden had a 40% job approval. Trump had about a 50 to 54% job approval the last time he was president. He was winning the major issues, and the Latino community voted as a working class vote. Those to me were why 2 weeks out I wrote that Trump was likely to win, and he did. She had an incredible lock on the abortion issue. Most people thought that that Trump was for a national abortion ban, but that abortion issue actually really didn't seem to change a lot of votes, because outside of the Latino community, most of the other votes, women included, voted within 2 points of what they voted like before. And then, issues in marketing, right? I think you have to see how marketing works in a similar way, how you could pick out a single issue and make it so important. Here's an example from one of our clients.
Everyone's a little bit nervous on their first day of school.
I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, you do. You can decide.
Maybe I can make some new friends.
Okay. Then what happens?
Then I'll travel the world. Then I'll get a job.
Okay. And then?
And I want a house.
Of course.
And my own family.
Yeah.
And my daughter.
Okay. And then what?
And I can sing.
Well, that sounds like a good plan, don't you think?
Yeah. Let's see what happens.
So, you can really see Volvo has honed in on a single issue that they were the leader in. Now, as I always point out, because I always find with either political candidates or marketing companies, they're worried about honing in on a single issue. But I always say, don't worry, they make the rest of the car too, okay? People know that, all right? So that it's okay to drive a single issue. And you can see, really, I think iPhone drove the web in your pocket. Tesla obviously created the entire category of electric vehicles, and Beyond Burger really created plant-based meats. So you really see, it's interesting, whether you're education president or whether I think the Trump campaign really put most of its effort on immigration, that there's nothing wrong with being not a single issue candidate, but to really be known as driving around a single issue. It can be incredibly successful. Finally, you have to have a competitive position. I can't say that the competitive positions in this campaign were particularly high-minded. Trump called Harris a moron. Harris said Trump is demeaning his presidency. Again, I think these largely just went back and forth. In some campaigns, the negative attacks, particularly in a lot of Senate races, and the competitive positioning will be the campaign. Interestingly, by the end of this campaign, this was very different from 2016. In 2016, Hillary and Trump each had about a 35% approval rating, which meant that all the voters were voting for a person he or she did not like, okay? Not all the swing voters, right? In this campaign, by the end of it, Trump had about a 47% favorable rating, and she had about a 47% favorable rating, which meant that actually the Trump voters liked Trump, and the Harris voters liked Harris, right? They just didn't like the other candidate. But that was a big difference. America is in a better mood relative to both of these candidates than they were. Now, when it comes to competitive positioning, my best known ad was this one.
And your children are safe and asleep. But there's a phone in the White House and it's ringing. Something's happening in the world. Your vote will decide who answers that call. Whether it's someone who already knows the world's leaders, knows the military, someone tested and ready to lead in a dangerous world. It's 3 a.m. and your children are safe and asleep. Who do you want answering the phone?
I'm Hillary Clinton, and I approve this message.
Now, for those who were around when that ad was done, we only put it on for $50,000, and the firestorm that it created was incredible. It was too late, but we won Ohio and Texas. It's very interesting. That ad has no information whatsoever. There are two kinds of competitive ads, ones that are loaded with information that has to be credible, and the others that just ask a question that people know the answer to, that you're elevating the importance. After this ad, everybody focused on commander-in-chief. Who would be a better commander-in-chief? You could see it in the regressions in the polls. It suddenly became important. Before the ad, nobody cared about that. So an ad like that can make a tremendous difference in what the voters focus on. So I'll go back to my KPIs. When you do a campaign or you're evaluating your opponent's campaign, look for these 5 things: a slogan, a biography, a targeted issues, competitive positioning. See if they have them, fill them in if you don't, and use this as a kind of helpful model to making those judgments. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mark. We ran a little over because we got a late start, so I'm going to do some rapid fire. But first, I got to. Face you? Okay. No, I don't want to get them up. We have limited time, so I have so many questions. So in preparation for this, when I said you're a challenger holding company, I meant it as a compliment. And I would say that your model was not the new business model, but the breakthrough innovation model, in my opinion. You've invested a lot in AI and data in the past couple of years. So what I did is I actually uploaded your presentation to an AI agent and asked it what question I should ask you. So it gave me about a dozen. It was Google's Notebook LM, which was unveiled at the ANA conference that you first presented this at. It gave me about a dozen questions. We don't have time. I'm just going to ask you the last one on competitive positioning because you ended with that. How can candidates effectively use comparisons to differentiate themselves from their opponents without appearing overly negative or aggressive?
Well, it's very interesting. The best way to do that is with humor, right? So, because oftentimes I've done the competitive ads in a commercial setting, right? I think the 3 AM ad was not overly negative, right? If you listen to it, it's a bunch of kids, it's a bunch of families, it's a voiceover. It implies the message rather than really stating it. We don't answer the question. So I think that's one way that you could do it. I am always dispirited that most political ads seem what I'd call slam bam formula, 17 parking tickets at age 12, and they're really rather dispiriting rather than artful and effective. But I also have used humor. My AT&T against MCI was a humorous couple, making fun of the other model. You could have used humor in this campaign. There are a lot of things you could have made fun of in terms of the border being closed and things like that. So there are a lot of ways I think that you can do it without the kind of this formula slash and burn.
Thank you. Okay, just going to channel James Lipton here and do some rapid fire one-liners. So just quick responses. Will the new administration be mostly good or bad for America and for Madison Avenue?
Well, I can't answer that one.
Okay. All right, we'll move on.
I can tell you what the polling shows on that one, and it shows that thinks that lower taxes and lower regulation will be good for business so far, and they're worried that they don't really know where the budget's going to come down on taxing and spending, and whether tariffs are going to be inflationary or not. So I think there's a set of complex issues, but I don't think anybody can really answer that right now.
True or false, America is being transformed by a rapidly expanding tech industrial complex.
No, America has always been transformed by rapidly expanding tech complex. That is the history of the country, right? And technology has been, and innovation has been the key differentiator for America over the rest of the world. So I think that continues to be the case. I think if anything, I was more concerned about the rise of government power than I was the rise of the tech power. I was a top executive at Microsoft for a while too. So I got to see the quote seat of power. And I can tell you that they're just trying to sell some windows, okay? They really weren't trying to take over the world that I saw.
So true or false, podcasts are the new silver bullet for political campaigns.
Well, it's interesting because what I like about podcasts is I have a concept called LASers, long attention spanners. So there's a whole concept that everything should be geared towards ADD. And I try to explain that actually online, it's the LASers or the long attention spanners who dominate. So podcasts, especially 3-hour ones, are really made for the LASers, and they are a significant group. So I don't think for the ADD group that podcasts are going to be the answer, but I think there's like 20-25% who are LASers, and I think they like podcasts and they absorb information from them.
Well, I apologize for being rapid fire, 8-second attention spans here, but so true or false, Mad Men on Madison Avenue or more or less MAGA?
No, not in a million years.
Okay. So if Trump was a challenger brand, which I know you debated, was it a new business model or a breakthrough innovation one?
Well, you'd have to say that his overall look, his campaign in 2016 was a genuine breakthrough campaign, right? The idea that he was going to, it was a surprise upset at the end. He was, a low probability challenger. He did run a completely unorthodox campaign based on 50,000 people rallies, becoming maybe the world's best stump speaker. So there's nothing in that, and he was outspent probably 2-1, right? So that was, and he managed to flip both constituencies and issues, trade, working, and take working class voters out of the Democratic column. I think the 2020 campaign was a terrible campaign, didn't have any advancements, and I think this campaign was an effective continuation of 2016, much more organized, much more with it, and Trump himself much more schooled, skilled, and effective.
Okay, in closing, if you'll allow me one more thoughtful closing question. We talked a lot about what marketers and political brands and campaigns should be doing and not doing. Can you talk a little bit about how Americans have changed over the time you've been doing this, and whether you think American voters have the ability to process fact-based information versus the other kind in an increasingly complex information marketplace better now or worse now than they have been historically?
Well, I would say my entire career has been based on a book called The Responsible Electorate, which said the simple thesis of this book is that the voters are not fools, which means that underlying, if you believe that, underlying each election is a set of rational elements, which I believe were the policies, the economy, the inflation, Afghanistan, here that underscore why the election came out the way it did. Americans are more educated than ever before. They are more diverse. They are older. I went back. I did a comparison when I graduated college. At the time, 45 years ago, and 45 years earlier, a Democrat had won by 5 points. 45 years later, a Democrat had won by 5 points. So the more things change, they have a habit of coming around. The real changes are Americans are richer. There's a growth of a professional class. They're more ethnically diverse. They are principally older. But you know, it's still about 24% liberal, it's about 38% moderate, and it's about 38% conservative. There hasn't actually been as much change as you think.
Okay. Well, I wish we had more time for the follow-up, but thank you for presenting. I learned a lot. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, guys.